It happened in the blink of an eye. A seasoned rider, always alone on the road, and never one to believe in love, found his heart racing like never before. On a scorching desert highway, with nothing but endless asphalt and the sound of his motorcycle, he saw him, a breathtaking man, shirtless, sun-kissed, and desperately flagging for a ride. In that moment, everything changed. The rugged rider, who had spent decades without anyone to call his own, felt something stir deep within him. He pulled over, captivated by the stranger's piercing gaze and confident charm. Little did he know, this encounter would lead to a night of passion so intense it would shake him to his core. And a betrayal so shocking it would leave him broken. What happened under the starry desert sky that made this solitary man believe in love for the first time? And why did it all vanish with the morning sun? Stay tuned for an emotional roller coaster filled with love, lust, and heartbreak, as one man learns that even the strongest hearts can be shattered. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, a vast expanse of golden sand shimmering under the relentless sun. Jackson had always loved the freedom of the open road. At 40, he was a seasoned rider, the kind of man who lived for adventure and solitude. His motorcycle was his escape, his therapy, his only true companion. He didn't mind being alone, it was simpler that way. But today, something was about to change, and Jackson had no idea how drastically. The road was eerily quiet, not a single car in sight for miles. The only sounds were the hum of his engine and the occasional whisper of the wind. Then he saw it, a figure in the distance. As he got closer, he realized it was a man, standing on the side of the road, his thumb extended in a plea for a ride. Jackson slowed down, his curiosity piqued. The man was shirtless, his chest glistening with sweat, and his jeans clung to his lean, muscular frame. His dark hair was messy, as though the wind had claimed it, and his piercing green eyes locked onto Jackson's as he pulled up. "Need a ride?" Jackson asked, his voice gruff, trying to mask the sudden fluttering in his chest. The man smiled, a slow, lazy grin that made Jackson's heart skip a beat. "Yeah, my car broke down a few miles back. I've been walking for hours." His voice was smooth, with just a hint of exhaustion. Jackson took a moment to process the situation. He wasn't used to offering rides, let alone to strangers, but there was something about this man, something magnetic. "Hop on," he said, finally motioning to the seat behind him. The man climbed on effortlessly, his strong arms wrapping around Jackson's waist. Jackson felt a jolt of electricity at the contact, a sensation he hadn't experienced in years. He couldn't remember the last time someone had touched him, let alone this intimately. His throat tightened, but he started the engine and focused on the road ahead. "What's your name?" Jackson asked after a few minutes of silence. "Ethan," the man replied, his breath warm against Jackson's ear. "And you?" "Jackson." "Nice to meet you, Jackson," Ethan said, his tone playful. "You're a lifesaver." They rode in silence for a while, the desert wind whipping around them. Jackson tried to concentrate on the road, but he was acutely aware of Ethan's body pressed against his. His heart raced, and he silently cursed himself for being so affected by a stranger. He had always prided himself on his independence, his ability to keep people at arm's length. But Ethan's presence was breaking down his walls, and he didn't know how to stop it. After about an hour, the motorcycle sputtered unexpectedly. Jackson frowned, pulling over to the side of the road. "Damn it," he muttered, inspecting the engine. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, stepping off the bike. "It's not starting," Jackson said, frustration evident in his voice. He worked on the bike for what felt like hours, but the sun was beginning to set, and the desert air was cooling rapidly. Ethan leaned against the motorcycle, watching Jackson with an amused expression. "You know," he said, "I have a tent in my bag. We could set it up for the night. It's not like anyone's coming down this road anytime soon." Jackson hesitated, glancing at Ethan. He wasn't sure if he should trust him, but the alternative, spending the night exposed in the freezing desert, wasn't appealing. "Fine," he said gruffly. "But we leave first thing in the morning." Ethan grinned, pulling out a compact tent from his bag. Jackson couldn't help but admire the man's confidence and resourcefulness. As they worked together to set up the tent, Jackson felt a strange sense of camaraderie. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Jackson found himself stealing glances at Ethan. There was something about him, something that made Jackson's heart ache in a way he hadn't felt in decades. And as the night closed in around them, he realized he was teetering on the edge of something he couldn't quite define. Little did Jackson know, this night would change everything. The tent was cramped, but it provided shelter from the biting desert wind that had replaced the scorching heat of the day. Inside, Jackson sat cross-legged, nervously fiddling with a small flashlight, the soft glow casting shadows across Ethan's face. Ethan, meanwhile, lounged on his side, his head propped up on his arm, looking completely at ease. "You're really good at this," Jackson said, breaking the silence. "The tent, I mean. You seem prepared." Ethan smirked. "Life teaches you to be. You never know when you'll be stranded in the middle of nowhere." His tone was casual, but Jackson sensed there was more behind those words than Ethan was letting on. Jackson nodded, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to sharing space with anyone, let alone someone as captivating as Ethan. The tent felt smaller with every passing second, the air thick with unspoken tension. He could feel Ethan's gaze on him, intense and unwavering. "So," Ethan said after a moment, his voice low, "what's your story, Jackson? A guy like you, riding alone all the time, there's gotta be more to it." Jackson hesitated. He wasn't the type to open up, but there was something about Ethan that made him want to. "I guess I've always been a loner," he said finally. "It's just easier that way. No expectations, no disappointments." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Easier, or safer? Jackson glanced at him, surprised by the question. "Maybe both," he admitted. "What about you? What were you doing out here?" Ethan chuckled softly. "Running away, I guess. Trying to leave some things behind." He didn't elaborate, and Jackson didn't press. It was clear Ethan had his own demons, just like Jackson did. As the conversation dwindled, silence settled over them once more. Outside, the desert was alive with the sounds of the night, distant howls, the rustling of wind through the sand. Jackson's eyes drifted to Ethan again, drawn to the way the dim light highlighted his sharp features. He was beautiful in a way that made Jackson's chest tighten. "You keep staring at me," Ethan said suddenly, a playful grin spreading across his face. Jackson felt his cheeks heat up. "I'm not a ban," he began, but Ethan cut him off, leaning closer. "It's okay," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "I don't mind." Jackson's breath caught. Ethan was close enough that he could feel the warmth of his skin, see the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved, the air between them charged with anticipation. Then, slowly, Ethan reached out, his fingers brushing against Jackson's. Jackson froze, his heart pounding in his chest. It had been so long since someone had touched him like this, since someone had looked at him the way Ethan was now. He didn't know what to do, but his body seemed to move on its own, leaning into Ethan's touch. "Is this okay?" Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible. Jackson nodded, his voice caught in his throat. "Yeah," he managed to say. "It's okay." Ethan closed the distance between them, his lips pressing softly against Jackson's. The kiss was tentative at first, almost hesitant, but it quickly deepened, the weight of their shared loneliness spilling into the moment. Jackson's hands found their way to Ethan's waist, pulling him closer, as years of bottled-up emotion poured out in a rush. They broke apart only when the need for air became too much. Ethan rested his forehead against Jackson's, a soft smile playing on his lips. "I didn't expect this when I stuck out my thumb today," he murmured. Jackson chuckled, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Neither did I." For the first time in years, Jackson felt something he couldn't quite put into words, a mix of hope, desire, and the terrifying possibility of connection. But as the night stretched on and their touches grew bolder, a small voice in the back of his mind warned him that moments like these didn't last. Under the desert sky, surrounded by nothing but the vastness of the night, Jackson allowed himself to believe, just for a little while, that maybe, this time, things could be different. The stars above the desert shone brighter than Jackson had ever seen, a blanket of light that seemed to stretch forever. The world felt silent and infinite, as if the night itself had paused to witness what was unfolding inside the small tent. Jackson lay on his back, his heart pounding like the steady hum of his motorcycle. Ethan was beside him, his arm draped casually over Jackson's chest, but there was nothing casual about the way it felt, electric, grounding, and utterly overwhelming. "You're tense, whoa," Ethan murmured, his voice low and teasing. "Relax, Jackson. Just let go." Letting go was something Jackson had never been good at. His life had always been about control, about keeping everything, everyone, at a safe distance. But with Ethan, it felt different. It wasn't just the physical closeness. It was the way Ethan looked at him, like he saw right through all the walls Jackson had spent years building. "I'm not used to this," Jackson admitted, his voice barely audible. Ethan propped himself up on one elbow, gazing down at Jackson. "Not used to what? Letting someone in?" Jackson nodded, unable to meet Ethan's eyes. "Yeah. I've been on my own for so long. I guess I forgot what it feels like to be close to someone." Ethan's expression softened, and he reached out, tracing a finger along Jackson's jawline. "Well," he said with a small smile, "maybe it's time you remembered." Before Jackson could respond, Ethan leaned down, capturing his lips in a kiss that was anything but hesitant. This time, it was fierce, demanding, and Jackson felt himself surrendering to it completely. The walls he had built, the solitude he had clung to, they all crumbled in the face of Ethan's touch. Their bodies moved together, a dance of passion and desperation. Ethan's hands roamed over Jackson's chest, his fingers tracing the tattoos and scars that told the story of a life lived on the edge. Jackson shivered under Ethan's touch, his breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in years, as though the fire Ethan ignited in him was burning away all the loneliness he had carried. "Ethan," Jackson whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. I don't know how to do this." Ethan paused, his gaze locking with Jackson's. "You don't have to know," he said softly. "Just feel." And Jackson did. He let himself feel everything, the heat of Ethan's skin against his, the weight of his body, the way their breaths mingled in the cool desert air. For the first time in decades, Jackson allowed himself to be vulnerable, to give in to the moment without fear of what might come next. Hours passed like seconds, the two of them lost in each other. The tent was filled with the sounds of their laughter, their whispered confessions, their shared desire. Outside, the desert night grew colder, but inside, it was as if the air itself was on fire. As they lay tangled together, Ethan's head resting on Jackson's chest, Jackson felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through him. It wasn't just the physical connection, it was the sense of being seen, of being wanted. He had spent so long convincing himself that he didn't need anyone, but Ethan had shattered that illusion in a matter of hours. "You okay?" Ethan asked, his voice drowsy but filled with genuine concern. Jackson nodded, tightening his hold on Ethan. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I am." For the first time in years, Jackson felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't just a chance encounter. Maybe, against all odds, this could be the beginning of something real. As the two of them drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Jackson allowed himself to believe, just for a moment, that he wasn't alone anymore. The desert night had finally given way to a soft, pale dawn. Jackson stirred, the cool morning air brushing against his skin. He blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the cramped space of the tent. Memories of the night flooded back, Ethan's touch, his laughter, the fiery connection they had shared. For the first time in years, Jackson had allowed himself to feel, to hope. But something felt off. Jackson reached out instinctively to the spot beside him, but it was empty. His heart sank. "Ethan?" he called, his voice rough from sleep. There was no reply. He sat up, rubbing his eyes and peering around the tent. It was eerily quiet, save for the faint rustling of the wind outside. A growing sense of unease pushed him to his feet. Crawling out of the tent, Jackson scanned the area, his eyes darting to where his motorcycle had been parked. His breath caught in his throat. The bike was gone. "No," he muttered, his chest tightening as panic set in. He spun around, searching for any sign of Ethan. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, but there was no trace of the man who had shared his tent, his heart, the night before. Jackson rushed back to the tent, tearing through his belongings. His bag was still there, but it had been rifled through. His wallet was gone, along with several personal items. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Ethan hadn't just left, he had taken everything Jackson had worked so hard to protect. For a moment, Jackson stood frozen, the betrayal cutting deeper than he thought possible. He replayed the night in his mind, questioning everything. Had it all been a lie? The laughter, the shared stories, the connection, had it meant nothing to Ethan? Anger surged through him, a fiery contrast to the cool morning air. "Damn it, Ethan!" Jackson shouted, his voice echoing across the empty desert. He kicked at the sand in frustration, his mind racing with questions. How could he have been so foolish? So vulnerable? But beneath the anger was something else, an ache that felt all too familiar. Jackson had spent his life avoiding connections, believing they only led to pain. Now, in the aftermath of Ethan's departure, that belief was reaffirmed, but it didn't make the hurt any easier to bear. He slumped to the ground, his hands burying in his hair. For years, Jackson had convinced himself that he didn't need anyone, that he was better off alone. But Ethan had broken through his defenses in a single night, only to shatter him completely by morning. The irony wasn't lost on him. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, Jackson knew he couldn't stay there. The desert was unforgiving, and without his bike, he was stranded. But the fire of betrayal in his chest wasn't going to let him give up so easily. He vowed to find Ethan, not just for the stolen bike and belongings, but for answers, for closure. Jackson stood, brushing the sand from his jeans. His eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of where Ethan might have gone. He was resourceful, a survivor. If anyone could make it out of this situation, it was him. "Fine, Ethan," Jackson muttered under his breath, his jaw set with determination. "You want to play games? Let's see who comes out on top. Little did Jackson know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test him in ways he never expected. What started as a chance encounter on a desert highway was about to become a battle of wills, secrets, and unexpected truths. The desert sun climbed higher, bathing the endless expanse of sand and rock in harsh, unrelenting light. Jackson stood by the crumpled tent, the weight of betrayal heavy on his chest. Ethan's absence stung more than he wanted to admit, but the disappearance of his motorcycle, his lifeline, left no room for indulgent self-pity. If he was going to make it out of this, he needed to act. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to think clearly. The soft morning light revealed faint tire tracks etched into the sand, veering off the road and into the desert. Ethan hadn't just stolen the bike. He'd gone off the beaten path, as if trying to ensure Jackson wouldn't follow. That thought stung. Not only had Ethan betrayed him, but he'd planned it carefully. "All right, Ethan," Jackson muttered under his breath. "You think you can disappear? Let's see about that." He grabbed what little remained of his belongings, stuffing them into his backpack. His water bottle, thankfully untouched, would buy him some time. The tracks weren't deep, which meant Ethan hadn't gotten far. The bike was heavy and likely running low on fuel, considering how much they had ridden the previous day. If Jackson moved quickly, he might catch up before the trail went cold. As he followed the faint tire tracks, Jackson couldn't help but replay the night before in his mind. Ethan's laughter, the way his eyes sparkled in the dim light of the tent, the warmth of his touch, it had all felt so real. But now, those moments felt like a cruel joke. How could he have been so naive? The tracks led him further into the desert, away from the road and deeper into the barren landscape. The heat was oppressive, and the silence was deafening. Jackson kept his eyes on the trail, his determination growing with every step. He refused to let Ethan get away with this, not without answers. After what felt like hours, Jackson spotted something in the distance. A shimmer of metal, partially obscured by a cluster of rocks. His heart leapt. It had to be the bike. Quickening his pace, he approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. The motorcycle was there, parked haphazardly and covered in a thin layer of dust. But Ethan was nowhere to be seen. Jackson's pulse quickened as he approached the bike, scanning the area for any sign of the man who had stolen it. The desert was vast, offering countless places to hide. "Ethan!" Jackson shouted, his voice echoing off the rocks. There was no response. He inspected the bike, relieved to find it mostly intact. The keys were gone, but Jackson wasn't worried. He knew how to bypass the ignition if needed. What puzzled him was why Ethan had abandoned it in the first place. Was he nearby, watching? Or had something else forced him to leave the bike behind? As Jackson knelt by the bike, a faint noise reached his ears, a shuffle of footsteps against sand. He whipped around, his eyes narrowing as he spotted movement among the rocks. "Come out, Ethan," Jackson called, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. "I know you're there." A figure emerged from the shadows, and Jackson's breath caught. Ethan stepped forward, his shirt now slung over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. His green eyes locked onto Jackson's, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "You found me," Ethan said finally, his voice calm but tinged with something Jackson couldn't place. "Regret, perhaps?" Jackson clenched his fists, the betrayal still fresh. "What the hell is this, Ethan? You steal my bike, my stuff, and then just... What? Hide out here until I give up?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "It's not what you think." "Oh, really?" Jackson snapped. "Because it sure as hell looks like you played me." Ethan took a step closer, his expression softening. "Jackson, I didn't mean for it to be like this, I swear." "Then what did you mean for it to be?" Jackson demanded, his voice rising. "You knew exactly what you were doing. Was it all a lie?" Ethan hesitated, and for a moment, Jackson thought he saw genuine pain in his eyes. "It wasn't all a lie," Ethan said quietly. "Last night. It was real. But I didn't have a choice." "You always have a choice." Jackson shot back, his anger giving way to the hurt he'd been trying to suppress. "You used me, Ethan. You made me believe." "I know," Ethan interrupted, his voice breaking. "And I'm sorry. But there are things you don't understand. Things I can't explain right now." Jackson stared at him, his mind racing. He wanted to believe Ethan, to hold on to the connection they'd shared, but the betrayal was too fresh. "Then make me understand," he said finally, his tone hard. "Because right now all I see is a liar and a thief." Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. "It's not that simple," he said, "but if you give me a chance, I'll make it right. I promise." Jackson wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. After everything Ethan had done, he still felt drawn to him, still wanted to believe in him. But trust wasn't something Jackson gave easily, and Ethan had shattered what little trust he'd managed to earn. "You've got one chance," Jackson said, his voice cold. "And if you screw it up, I swear I'll make you regret it." Ethan nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "You won't regret this, Jackson, I promise." But as Jackson stared into Ethan's eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Ethan was a man of secrets, and Jackson wasn't sure if he was ready to uncover them all. The sun was relentless as Jackson and Ethan stood in the barren desert, tension thick between them. Jackson's mind churned with questions, but he forced himself to focus on the immediate task, getting the bike running again. The confrontation could wait, at least for now. Ethan hovered nearby, his usual confidence replaced by a hesitant silence. He watched as Jackson knelt by the bike, his hands steady as he bypassed the ignition. The engine roared to life after a few tense moments, but Jackson didn't feel the usual satisfaction. This time, the sound was a reminder of what had been stolen. Not just his bike, but his trust. "You're lucky I found it," Jackson said, his voice cutting through the stillness. He didn't look at Ethan, but his words carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. Ethan sighed, taking a step closer. "I know I messed up. But you have to believe me, what I did wasn't about you." Jackson stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "It sure as hell feels like it was about me. You used me, Ethan, you lied to me." Ethan flinched, the guilt clear in his expression. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Jackson. I had my reasons." "Then start talking," Jackson demanded, his eyes narrowing. "Because right now, all I see is a guy who saw an easy mark." Ethan hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that simple." "Hishimi," Jackson snapped, his patience wearing thin. Ethan sighed, glancing at the horizon as if searching for answers in the endless expanse of sand. "I was running," he admitted finally. "From people who aren't exactly forgiving." Jackson frowned, crossing his arms. "Running from what?" "Debt, bad decisions. People who don't take no for an answer." Ethan's voice was quieter now, laced with something Jackson couldn't quite place, fear, maybe. "I thought I could start fresh out here, but things didn't go as planned, and then I met you." Jackson's jaw tightened. "So what? You thought stealing from me would fix your problems?" "I thought I didn't have a choice," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "But I was wrong. You didn't deserve any of this." Jackson wanted to believe him, but the betrayal still burned. "You used me, Ethan, you made me believe." He stopped, the words catching in his throat. He didn't want to admit how much Ethan's actions had hurt him. "I know," Ethan said softly. "And I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Jackson shook his head, his anger and hurt warring with the part of him that still wanted to trust Ethan. "You can't just undo what you did." "I can try," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Let me prove it to you. Let me help you." Jackson stared at him, searching for any sign of deception. For a moment, he saw the vulnerability in Ethan's eyes, the cracks in his facade. He wasn't sure if he could trust him, but something in his gut told him this wasn't the end of their story. "Fine," Jackson said finally. "But you're on thin ice. One more lie, one more screw-up, and we're done." Ethan nodded, relief washing over his face. "I won't let you down again." Jackson wasn't sure if he believed him, but for now, it was enough to keep moving. "Let's pack up and get out of here," he said, turning toward the tent. "We've wasted enough time." As they worked in silence, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was hiding something more. The road ahead was uncertain, and Jackson wasn't sure if he was ready for the twists and turns it would bring. But one thing was clear, he wasn't going to let his guard down again. As they rode off together, the tension between them lingered like a storm on the horizon. Jackson kept his eyes on the road, but his thoughts were on Ethan. The man who had betrayed him. The man who, against all logic, still made his heart race. And the man who might just break him all over again. The hum of the motorcycle filled the silence as they rode side by side, the desert wind whipping around them. Jackson's grip on the handlebars was tight, his mind a whirlwind of conflicted emotions. Ethan sat behind him, close but distant, as if the air between them carried the weight of everything unspoken. "Where are we heading?" Ethan finally asked, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. Jackson didn't answer immediately. He wasn't sure himself. He only knew he needed to get as far away from the barren wasteland as possible, and figure out what to do about the man who had turned his world upside down. "Away," he said shortly. Ethan didn't press further, but Jackson could feel his gaze lingering, a silent plea for understanding. The road stretched endlessly ahead, as uncertain as their next steps. As they stopped at a small roadside diner for a break, Jackson watched Ethan closely. Every movement, every glance seemed calculated. Ethan was holding back, and Jackson wasn't sure if it was out of guilt or fear. "You're not telling me everything," Jackson said as they sat across from each other. His tone was sharp, cutting through the clatter of the diner around them. Ethan looked up, his green eyes clouded with something Jackson couldn't place. "There's a lot I wish I could explain," he admitted. "But some of it, it's dangerous." "Dangerous for who?" Jackson pressed. Ethan hesitated. "For both of us." The cryptic response only fueled Jackson's frustration. He leaned back, arms crossed. "You've got a lot to prove, Ethan, and not much time to do it." Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll prove it, just trust me." But Jackson wasn't sure he had any trust left to give. As night fell, they set up camp again, this time under a canopy of stars that seemed both comforting and mocking. Jackson sat by the fire, staring into the flames, lost in thought. Ethan joined him, sitting close enough that their shoulders brushed. "I meant what I said," Ethan murmured, breaking the silence. "About last night. It wasn't a lie?" Jackson didn't respond immediately. He wanted to believe him, but his heart still carried the weight of betrayal. "If it wasn't a lie," he said finally, "then prove it." Ethan turned to him, his gaze steady. "I will," he said simply. "No matter what it takes." For the first time, Jackson saw a flicker of something in Ethan's eyes, determination, maybe even sincerity. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was a start. As the fire crackled and the desert wind whispered around them, Jackson allowed himself a sliver of hope. Their journey was far from over, but maybe, just maybe, the road ahead held something worth fighting for. "What did you think of the story? Let's talk." We just shared this thrilling and emotional story of love, betrayal and second chances on the open road, and now we want to hear from you. What's your take? Did Jackson and Ethan's journey captivate you? Did the twists and turns keep you hooked? Share your thoughts and give us your rating from 1 to 10 in the comments below. We'd love to know which part resonated with you the most. This channel isn't just about stories, it's about creating a space where we can connect and grow as a community. Tell us about your favorite moments, share your personal experiences, or just drop a comment to say hello. Let's start a conversation and get to know each other better. Your feedback is incredibly important to us. What did you enjoy about the story? What would you like to see more of? Let's keep the dialogue going in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that will keep you engaged and leave you wanting more. We look forward to hearing from you in the comments.